Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where Doge reads stories of D&D cringe. In today's episode, we have a tale about a player that is so bad and creepy that he should be the poster child of that guys. But before we get into this story, I feel we need a dose of levity, so have some lucky, the like and comment kitty. There we go, and with our spirits up, let's bring them right back down. That guy infiltrates group to insert fetishes, PvPs, and starts out-of-game fights, then tries to write a horror story about us after we kick him out. Sexual content warning. By Reddit user RedGhost1197. I want to preface this with this knowledge. I was going to be the bigger man here and not post because I thought at one point me and this guy were friends, and it felt weird to publicly shame someone I had actually played with for this long. He's not better than the other cases I've written about in the past, in fact possibly worse, but it felt more personal in a sense. I wasn't going to until my friend whom he still talks to shared a message screenshot showing that he plans on writing one about us, and me specifically, as I'm why he got removed from the game by bringing the discussion up with others in the group. This is going to be a long one, but I'll start from the beginning and try to exclude anything that isn't a red flag that comes into play later. Also, as for the players in the story, that guy will be referred to as such, or by TG for shortening. There's a few other important characters to cover, but I will nickname them as they become relevant. This all started about 2-ish years ago, right before COVID stuff hit. I was out a couple of players in my long-running Vampire The Masquerade Wild West game thanks to schedules changing and people getting new jobs and stuff. I had run into bad players nearly every time I had been on Roll20, but to keep the game going for the remaining players, I needed fresh blood, pun intended. This time I was going to be super careful, I thought, and me and the players interviewed all the applicants on Discord to see if we meshed well or not, and if their ideas were cool and played well into the setting. Sort of a session 0 to a session 0. 2 people shined in this, and ironically, both wanted to play Tremere originally, but that guy swapped to Tzimiski Doctor because I had talked about how cool it sounded, like a cool concept when a former player did it. So that guy and the Tremere came into the group and everything seemed really cool and chill at first. His character was specifically supposed to be a high humanity Tzimiski who used his abilities to heal impossible wounds and tried to strictly abide by the Hippocratic Oath as a code of honor of sorts. The idea sounded super cool on paper, but almost immediately in play, he soft swapped his old doctor into being a prostitute who constantly tried to sleep with half of the NPCs. This is Vampire The Masquerade, and I have never said that sex stuff was off limit, just fade to black. So this was partially my fault, but in retrospect, it's extremely red flaggy that he stealthed his weird sex concept by hiding it behind a completely different one. He and the Tremere started getting very heated with each other, but I assumed it was mostly in-game clan bickering stuff, so I didn't fully hard stop it, just toned it down when it got too far. But eventually, the Tremere and him started to grow increasingly hostile until it reached a breaking point. Now, Tremere was also a weirdo, but of a different kind, and that's a story for a different day. But basically, he leaves the game, and so does that guy, for a while. That guy jumps back in some chapters later, and starts uncomfortably ramping up the sex stuff again, but not much changes there. What does change is one of my other players, one who played a gargoyle in mine, starts running their own Vampire the Masquerade game, a Modern Knights one this time. Everyone from my game was invited, and I make a Tremere Mr. Freeze basically, with a loved one sick, and preserved with filtered out vitae and sleeping meds while he searched for a cure to a blood disease by using the horrific abilities he has found himself with. But that guy makes another sexual character. A child one. Why? Just why? Yet again, he didn't sell it to us as a sexual concept. A Lazambra little girl who had some Carmarilla rank to pull, yet he had her sexually active with his ghoul and tried to seduce other characters. Thankfully, the child concept was later aged up by recommendation of the GM. I think he was trying a let the right one in concept with the whole ghoul relationship, but it still set off a lot of red flags. This time, I start to notice way more of what's going on being a player. As GM, he would always play nice and whatnot to me, and I was an experienced enough GM to keep chaos from ensuing from that guy for the most part. But this was one of Gargoyle's first games. He tries to make everyone uncomfortable and constantly catch them in something wrong so he can use Camarilla rank. Whenever we call him out on it, he uses the age-old, "It's what my character would do," because he's supposed to be like an inquisitor or something, and that we shouldn't be taking it personally. I try to just groan and go along with it, but it makes the game painful whenever we aren't split up. The moments alone, or when I wasn't paired with him, were the most fun for me and whatever other players were away from him. The game doesn't last too much longer, because college and work changes Gargoyle schedules. I decide I'm kind of burnt out on the Wild West game, and think a change of game for a while can help. So I start up a Sabbat game, and in session 0, warn people that it's likely gonna be more graphic, but fade to black rules still apply. That guy makes a Toreador Antitribu, who's also, get this, a sexual child character. This time around, it's one that hunts pedos online, using high social and computer stuff, and given it's a Sabbat game, and pedo hunting sounds cool, I allow it. It wasn't as bad this time, thankfully, but I didn't fully realize his pattern yet. All of his characters fall into one of 3 concepts, including all of the ones he's talked about making or says he's played in the past. Hypersexual bimbos, hypersexual child characters, or characters solely made to piss off another player. Well, it sounds like he has a certain archetype there, huh? He would start talking more and more about his child characters especially, sharing all sorts of picture examples he would find, and talking about all of their methods in increasingly uncomfortable ways. Because he started off slow and slowly ramped up, we almost didn't notice, just that the atmosphere of the group kept getting less comfortable. Now we move into another game. Another one of my friends, we will call him Jazz Age, as he was running a 1920s New Orleans vampire game, started that game up. I excitedly gave my character concept and stuff first, since he was allowing any clan, and getting away from being a forever GM was exciting. My concept was a Setite speakeasy owner, and a blood sorcerer. His motivations mostly revolved around controlling vice and crime in the city, as a way of making it cleaner and more humane, and he wanted to go up in rank so he could try to control the vampire side of things too. My guy acted pretty flamboyant in order to hide a lot of his true feelings, and pretended to be more sexually active and drug-addled than he really was. That guy apparently really hated my concept and how my guy spoke and acted, so rather than say something, he started making his 3rd category of character. He made a Giovanni mobster who absolutely hated, quote-unquote, fairies and fruits, as they were the terms for the time, and he immediately started singling me out. Oh, good. Let's just toss some homophobia on top of everything else. He would instantly not trust my guy with anything, chain offensive anti-gay insults towards him, and always hide behind the "what my character would do." He would take offense to my guy just trying to help, and so on. Meanwhile, he also started provoking me out of character during the games, getting me more and more mad, whilst I tried to keep my cool and enjoy the game, until we would break into full arguments, and he would point out my anger as an excuse for him being right. I think there's 5 main reasons he really hated this character in particular, and why he was especially mad at me. 1. I denied him a spot in a werewolf game that I was running. I had started it while he was gone, and it was already full, so he didn't get to use his sex bimbo black furry concept. 2. I was playing the semi-sexual character this time around, and actually doing it in a way that didn't make people uncomfortable, so he lost one of his favorite hobbies. 3. He always claimed to be a writer and someone in the business, and absolutely hated on any backstory or concept that didn't meet his standards, despite never actually writing proper backstories himself, and not being bothered with even bullet point listings, having the story almost only play out in prelude sessions. Rolling into the last one actually, being a forever GM, I'm used to listing tons of notes, so my backstory and notes and connected NPCs list was about 10 pages, and when the GM used most of it in the game, giving scenes my guy was connected to with more emphasis. I'll admit that this was way too much emphasis, but Jazz Age was new, so after each game, I tried to talk to him about lessening it and tried to prop up the rest of the players more so they could get scenes. That guy had some main character syndrome. Ironically, he's trying to claim that I do, even when I offered him to take over on tons of scenes just to avoid the drama, and saw me as a threat given the preludes. My guy was Keeper of Elysium, so he was present in most of the other characters' preludes as a way of introducing them to the city and connecting the coterie together. 5. I was Jazz Age's friend in real life and have been one of his only GMs ever, so he generally trusted my opinions and rulings on things whenever he had questions, which that guy likely saw as me co-DMing and taking control of the game, so he felt like he had to dethrone me. These are all just theories though. What I do know is that they reached a head at the beginning of one session. My guy had been forced to diablerize a Sabbat member by the prince to make a statement about the war, that anything done to a Sabbat was now fair game in his city. My guy, being of high humanity, was sort of miserable about this, but got flashes of info from the Sabbat head, info on locations and other stuff, so he immediately contacted the sheriff, as he had Lawman's friend, so he was on good terms with them. The prince wanted my guy to say the info in front of the whole city, so he gathered all the vampires into his mansion and put me on the podium. As soon as my guy starts talking, that guy starts calling me a traitor and says that he thinks that I've been taken over by the Sabbat that I ate with zero proof and pulls a gun on me. To be fair, Gargoyle wasn't totally sure either, but he never pulled a weapon, and he was my guy's friend and bodyguard and wanted a chance to fully check me over. The prince and sheriff both say they checked my guy to ensure that wasn't the case, but that guy pulls the hammer back on his gun and aims it squarely at my head. My guy calmly walks over, pointing out all the security in this room and that if he brains the only man with critical intel, they will do worse than kill him. Out of character, I also try to point out what's happening and try to talk him out of PvP, but this was an opportunity that he wanted, so obviously he won't listen. I remind him once more of the security before saying, "Do it then, see what happens," as a way of trying to force rationality and say as much out of character. He rolls with celerity and spends a willpower so he can try to instantly kill me. Even with my fortitude, he tapors me and was only a couple points away from ashing me. Then nothing happens to him, because the GM had no clue what to do about this. I left the game for a good 10 minutes to cool off because of how bullshit what just happened was, and the last words from that guy was the most insanely smug rendition of "it's what my character would do" I've ever heard. The GM calls me back in so we can try to settle this out, and at first he just tries to have someone of older blood in the room feed me their blood to heal me out of torpor and let bygones be bygones. But I point out that after that, I have to leave the coterie, as I couldn't work with the guy that tried to murder me, especially if his character went unchallenged for it. Realizing this, the GM, who is still confused by the events that just happened, decided to retcon back to before he pulled the trigger, and had the sheriff run and push the gun away. Along with this, we have a serious conversation about going to the GM and expressly telling him or the other players if he has an issue, and that PvP of that nature would strictly not be allowed. After this, I listen to what he said and we try to move on. A couple sessions go by and that guy is still acting exactly the same, which builds into another argument, but this time I expressly went to the GM first so he could moderate, and yet again, he tries to provoke me in the argument. The game becomes even less fun, and I start talking to the GM that I'm thinking of leaving. I say I'll try a couple more sessions, but if nothing improves, I'm gonna want to go back to just forever GMing. The next session, I make a last-ditch attempt to try and fix things in and out of character. I suggest to the group that we should blood bond to the first degree to kind of force a likability thing without calling out specifically that guy. I explicitly ask everyone and say that if even one person doesn't like the idea, we don't have to do it. Everyone says that they like it, except for that guy, who seems unenthused, but said yes. I ask him again if he's sure or not, to which he just apathetically says yes again. In character, this was done because we were about to discuss negative things about the prince, and we wanted to make sure that none of us turned the rest of the conspiracy in. The rest of the session, I go explicitly out of my way to ask other people everything, and we all seem to be in agreement, and they make suggestions of their own, to which I go along with. Except for that guy, who seems to be acting like he's having a horrible time, but won't say a damn thing, even after we asked him repeatedly. Then comes the moment he says no on something, after already agreeing on it. We had priorly established the ruling that memories made while drunk, or whatnot, were harder to surface level read, with high auspex, and the prince was a Toreador. So, before we discussed any possible treason, the group had agreed that it was best if they all had a few shots to make these memories semi-hazy. When it comes time to do it, despite agreeing and having heard the treason talk, he refuses and walks out. My guy tries to follow him and asks if he's sure, because he's risking the whole group now that we already finished the meeting. He basically says to fuck off, and that ends the session. After the session, when it's just me and the GM around, he throws out that I forced him to do everything that session, even after explicitly asking everything. Both me and the GM are confused and angered by this. We both pointed out that we had promised to speak up or speak to the GM if we had problems, and that he had every chance to do this. Then comes one of the worst moments between us, and the one that was kind of my final straw. He says he couldn't because I'm such a dick, and that I would automatically just blow up on him. But not to worry, it wasn't my fault. I was just a dick because of a personal really bad family situation going on that I had trusted the group with in personal talks. He used an in real life personal family struggle against me as the ultimate smug provocation. I do get very angry at this and demand to know why he thinks that it's okay to use something like that against someone in an unrelated discussion. He instantly jumps to pointing out how angry I am over this as an excuse for his behavior, to which I realize that I'm finally fucking done and jump out of the chat. Apparently, right after this, he immediately tries to tell the GM, who's still shocked by the audacity of that guy, that he wants to turn all the intel into the sheriff, not realizing the game is basically done. I wasn't around for this, but was told shortly after by the GM. The GM tells him no, and tries to get him to apologize to me. But instead of apologizing, he realizes he won't get his way, or have that tactic work again, so he blocks me on everything and leaves my server instead, essentially rage quitting from me. I thought this would really be the end of it all, but unfortunately there's one more final fuck you that he gets to make before, as a group, we all kick him for good. Jazz Age had a brother who was also in the group and was a friend, and he wanted to run a 5e D&D game, so I'll call him D&D. He never invited that guy, but that guy was terminally online and discovered it, and forcibly invited himself despite there already being a pretty full group. I'm already uncomfortable with this and make it known, but Jazz Age and Gargoyle both decide to make buffer characters who can help keep him from doing shit in character, and so we don't really have to directly interact. I nervously throw out my concept as a Dr. Doom armored wizard deal. That guy immediately counters with child trap hypersexual charm magic user who basically date rapes everyone using their charm magic. As such, I start completely changing my mechanical build so I can have charm resistance, go artificer to have mental protection items, and armorer so he can't forcibly remove my clothes. This whole time, he's secretly, creepily, erotic role-playing and sending weird pictures to Jazz Age, which is making him pretty uncomfortable, but he doesn't know what to do. He, being terminally online, shows up to basically stalk my prologue session, which made me really uncomfortable, and I didn't even have fun with it as a result. Afterwards, the group has a discussion, and he starts talking jokingly about the stuff he's going to do to our characters. I nervously laugh and explain how my armor can't be removed, and I have high saves and resistance against charms. This basically triggers him, and he changes his entire attitude during the discussion. He also tries to unblock me to get back on my server when I talk to JazzAge and D&D about a hunter game that we're doing, because that guy wanted back in, but wasn't going to ask. So he makes this big public point about unblocking me. I ignore that and keep discussing. Shortly after, JazzAge wonders if he should try again with that guy and asks me, to which I say it's a very bad idea, but I try to stay civil about how I word it and point out that he never really apologized or learned anything from the last time, so it will likely start problems again. I eventually admit that in a smaller group without buffer characters, that I will leave the game if he tries anything again. That guy makes a fake non-apology about the headshot, as in he says that it was retconned, but still says it's what his character would do, and the words sorry have nothing to do with it. He also seems to think that this was the only problem between us in that entire game. This sort of proved that he learned nothing and was not going to change. As it is, I wasn't sure about the D&D one. I mentioned how I explicitly did my build to avoid him PvPing, and this is when Jazz shows me something and says that he's not sure if he should show it or not, but that it feels relevant. He shows me chat logs between him and that guy right after the D&D prologue discussion, where he went on a triggered tirade about how dumb it was that I made my character impossible to molest, and that I was being a prude. To make this worse, I had explicitly told him before, in another game, one of my biggest lines that I draw is, "Don't molest my characters." I've been a victim of sexual assault in real life before, and that this was also something that he explicitly knew. I felt legitimately sick in my stomach seeing the chat logs and thanked my friend for showing me them. Me and him went to the GM and I said that I would be leaving the game. He said that he was shocked too, given how uncomfortable he was making everyone else and how he just slipped his way in. It was best just to kick him from the server. They wanted to avoid confrontation, so they just sort of said that they nuked the server because of other problems, and that they weren't going to run games. He apparently believed this, as he, up to this morning, talked with Jazz, which is what leads us to right now. After all of that, after making us all uncomfortable for years, and almost ruining multiple games, and trying to gaslight us, he started writing a horror story about us, and specifically me. He was gonna title it, "Shot a guy with main character syndrome in the head," but was likely gonna villainize all of us also. If you're seeing this, that guy, and I think you will eventually, you can write your story or whatever, but please leave the others alone. I'm the one you really have beef with, it seems, and they just want to relax and be comfortable in their own servers again. TLDR, we accidentally invited a secret sex pest into our group. He hid it pretty well for a while, and we were all awkward nerds who didn't know how to approach it when we realized what was happening. He then proceeded to fuck our games for a while. Well, I would say the term "that guy" is a bit of an understatement here. I would say that this dude surpasses that into godhood of that guys. Honestly, I'm not sure how the red flags with the sexualized characters, especially those of children, weren't seen and taken care of right then. I think that being a hard limit should be a default for any DM. Then there was the blatant targeting of OP's character and use of slurs in the Jazz era game. Yet another hard limit that I would have put my foot down on. Then there was the personal attack out of game about OP's current family turmoil. That was just a low blow. At least OP had the foresight to make a character built to avoid being taken advantage of by that guy in the D&D game though. Though they shouldn't have to worry about that sort of thing to begin with. It's no wonder that game never got off the ground. I have no idea how that guy could see that he's anything but the antagonist of this, and think that writing a horror story about the other players and OP would shine anything but ridicule upon himself. Hopefully, OP and the others can get back into playing tabletop RPGs without that guy, and actually have a good time this time around. Have you ever had a run-in with a that guy that you would consider a sex pest? Or one that would attack you personally for not getting their way? If so, and would like it to be read on the channel, be sure to link it in the comments, post it on the d&Ddoge subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I think we all need another dose of kitty after that story. Until next time.